Hello. Today I would like to introduce two concepts, the concept of prospection and the concept of retrospection. When are these concepts applicable? When can we apply prospection and retrospection when we speak? What are they? What is the meaning of that? Prospection and retrospection take place when, for some reason, we have two actions, and one which are closely linked, and one is submitted to the other. So prospection and retrospection might happen in the present, they might happen in the past, or they might happen in the future. Never mind whereabouts on the timeline we are. The important thing and the relationship they have with time is that we jump from the time of reference that we have, we jump forwards or backwards according to the sequence in which the actions happened. So we depart, let's call it that way, from the primary action, and our destination is the secondary action. If the movement is a forward movement, then that will be prospection. If the movement is a backward movement, then that will be retrospection. So as I said, they happen when two actions are closely linked and one is submitted to the other. Generally speaking, there are three levels at which that might happen. It might happen within the sentence. It might happen between the verb and the complement when the complement is an action. So the verb would be the primary action and the complement would be the secondary action. It might happen when within the verb phrase we have an auxiliary, and the main verb is another action. So there is a relationship between the auxiliary, which in this case would be the main primary action, and the verb, which in this case would be the secondary action. For example, when we have a modal verb, the modal might be a model of deduction. The deduction is made at present, but that deduction might refer to something which is still to pass or something which might have happened before. And finally, that prospection and retrospection might happen between two sentences when one of the sentences is submitted to the other because they are subordinate, for example, it might be the case, and there is a sequence. So depending on, for example, the way in which I introduce the sequence, we might apply a prospection or a retrospection. So presently, I will bring you an analysis and I will bring you an explanation of how the concepts of prospection and retrospection can be applied to each of these cases independently and separately so that you can understand what I mean by prospection and retrospection better. We said in the previous excerpt of the video that the concept of prospection and retrospection, or the concepts of prospection and retrospection, are not attached to the time we are in. I mean, we can be in the past, we can be in the present, or we can be in the future. They are simply related to the way in which we jump from that past, present, or future, whether we jump forwards or whether we jump backwards, depending on the relationship or the sequence in which primary and secondary actions have been introduced. We are going to start with the first case in which the prospection and retrospection might be applied when we speak. The first case in which the prospection and retrospection can be applied when we speak is when within the sentence we have the case in which the complement is an action. For example, I like apples. In I like apples, apples is a noun, which is the complement of my sentence. But what happens when we have an action instead of a noun? A nominalized action. For example, I like eating apples. When I have an action acting as the complement, that action, then the relationship between the verb, which would be the primary action, and the complement, which would be the secondary action, suffers this phenomenon that I called prospection or retrospection. Why is it that we've always been told that verbs of like and dislike are followed by gerund mostly? Because they are based on previous experience. I cannot say whether I like something if I haven't tasted it before. So there is usually a relationship of retrospection between the verb and the complement. For example, I like eating apples. And why is it that when I use the same verb, would like, with would, it is followed by infinitive? Because in that case, it resembles want, or it means to want. I say that I want something in a very polite way. Excuse me, I would like to eat an apple. I am mentioning nothing about my previous experience. The only thing I do is ask for an apple. So the relationship between like and the complement is a prospective relationship. I would like to eat an apple, but I haven't eaten it yet. That happens with a great deal of verbs. Is it applicable 100% of the times? No, it is not applicable 100% of the times. But it is very widely applied, which means that when I come to verb patterns, because that's what I am talking about, verbs followed by gerund or verbs followed by infinitive, instead of having to study 500 cases, I will just have to study a few, because most of them, or a great deal of them, follow this pattern. Sometimes verbs can be followed by either by infinitive or by gerund. I mean, obviously, the relationship between the verb and the complement is prospective, I will use an infinitive. Infinitives are always prospective. That is why when I want to express purpose, I use an infinitive. Gerund, let's say that the gerund is retrospective. It makes reference to something that happened before. And sometimes it simply takes charge of those things that the infinitive won't take charge of. And I'm going to give the example of stop, which is the one we have here on the screen, or the example of need. Could you please stop smoking? What I am saying is whether somebody would mind interrupting the action that they have been doing so far. If I say, shall we stop to have a coffee? What I'm saying is stop, interrupt what we have been doing, and we don't know what it is, in order to start a new action, which is to have a coffee. So in this case, stop can be followed by either, and it, in a way, complies with the norm in both cases. If I use the verb to need is basically prospective. I need to drink water. I need something which hasn't been given me yet. That's why I need it. I need to drink water. So what happens with the gerund? Can I ever use need with a retrospective meaning? No. But what they do is that as the gerund is free and it hasn't been spoken for, what I do is that I use the gerund to replace the passive infinitive. And instead of saying, my car needs to be serviced, I say, my car needs servicing. So that happens with many verbs, with a great deal of verbs. Sometimes they comply with the norm with both gerund and infinitive. Some other times that we comply with a norm in one of them, which is usually the infinitive, the prospective non-finite form, and the gerund will take upon itself that function that the infinitive will not take. In the previous part, we say that the first example, the first case in which we can apply the prospection or retrospection is when my complement is an action, and obviously it depends on the verb itself, which is my primary action. And we use the infinitive for prospection and we use the gerund for retrospection. For example, remember to open the door, because first you remember and then you open the door. If you do not remember, you will not open the door. I remember having a coffee with him. This means that at some point of time in the past, you had a coffee with him and now you remember it. The second case in which we can apply prospection or retrospection is within the verb phrase. When we have an auxiliary, a Kevin, whichever the Kevin, or we might use, for example, a model Kevin, and the Kevin would be the primary action, and then the verb, the main verb, would be the secondary action. So when the Kevin makes reference to an action that is still to happen, we might say that it's a prospective use of the modal verb. And when it makes reference to something that is supposed to have happened before, then that would be a retrospective use of the Kevin. So what happens when we want to use the Kevin in a prospective way? For example, let's say a modal verb. When we want to use the Kevin with a prospective verb, we use a simple, for example, when it is an infinitive, a pair infinitive, we use a simple infinitive. When it is in the event that we want to use a retrospective use of the verb, in the example I said was the model, then we would use a perfect infinitive. For example, if I say you might pass your exam. What I am simply giving probability that something might happen in the future, because the deduction, the inference that I am expressing, the probability refers to something that might happen afterwards. If I say he might have lost his keys, this means that in the past it is probable that he lost his keys, but I make the deduction now, or I infer that it might have happened now. I am inferring it now. So the meaning of the modal verb is not so, it cannot be said that it's a past modal verb. For example, if I say, yesterday I had to do my homework, that's a past modal verb because the obligation was past. But in this case, my deduction or my expression of probability, my inference is present. It is now that I am deducing, that I am thinking, that I am hypothesizing, and I am referring to something that happened before. Or for example, with future, when I retire, I will read a great deal of books, okay? That's prospective because the will makes reference to something that will happen next. But if I make reference to something that happened before, for example, by the time I retire, I will have worked for more than 40 years because I am expressing that in that time of the future, something will have happened before. So I am setting, or I am expressing the action with a retrospective approach. I mean, perfect tenses are not really tenses. The perfect is an aspect, and that aspect is a viewpoint on the action, a retrospective viewpoint of the action, more than a tense. Tense is, any tense can be said in the perfect because any tense can be said retrospectively. The present perfect is retrospection from the present, and the past perfect is retrospection from the past. But we will see that in the next excerpt when we talk about the relationship between two different sentences, one submitted to the other. So in the previous excerpts, we explained the concepts of prospection, retrospection. We explained how they can be applied when this prospection, retrospection takes place between main verb and complement. We explained what happens when it takes place within the noun, the verb phrase between auxiliary and main verb. And now we are going to explain what it entails when it's the relationship between two sentences, especially when one is submitted to the other. So in the first place, we have to, when we want to express something that might require the use of a connector, and that sets a relationship between two sentences, we have, in the first place, we have to decide which of our sentences is going to be the reference of time. So once we have the reference of time, then we will jump to the future, no, forwards or backwards. To the future is wrong, because we might have to jump forwards, but we might still be in the past. For example, what happens when we are in the present? Well, when we are in the present, obviously, the prospection will be in the future and the retrospection will be in the past. For example, she's telling me that she will come back tomorrow. She's telling me that she came yesterday. Okay, so I jump to the future, I jump forward, and I jump to the future unavoidably. And if my reference of time is the present, if I am retrospective, I jump to the past unavoidably. What happens when my time of reference is past? For example, yesterday she told me, okay, now, if she told me what she was going to do the next day, the tense I will use is the conditional. The conditional is prospection in the past. She told me that she would come the next day. If what she tells me is what had happened the day before, she will use the past perfect. She told me that she had been to London 3 times. So that is why the past perfect needs a past simple in order to be used in a sentence properly, because the past perfect is not really a tense from my point of view. It's a prospective form of the past. It's the prospection of the past. I cannot use a past perfect all by itself. I can use a past simple all by itself. Yesterday I got up at 5. But I cannot use a past perfect all by itself if I don't have a reference of time which makes me move back to a further past. What happens when my reference of time is future? The problem with the future is that the furthest future tense that I have is the will, because the other futures establish a relationship between the future and the present. It might be a plan I have in the present, or it might be an arrangement that I have already started to carry out, let's say, in the present. So it is connected to the present, which is the furthest future tense that I have. It is the will. So if I wish to show prospection in the future, there is no other tense I can use to do that. So what do? Very simple. We use, when we want to establish this prospection, retrospection in the future, that the time of reference being future, the tense we will use for that time of reference will be present simple. Once we use the present simple as the future reference of time, we can jump to a further future, which is the will, or we can will plus simple infinitive, bare infinitive. And if we want to jump backwards, which is still future, we will use a perfect bare infinitive, or a bare perfect infinitive, better. For example, when I retire, I will read 100 books. This means that I have to retire first, and then I will read the 100 books. When I retire, I will have worked for 30 years. This means that the retirement will be the deadline and will be the end of those 30 years that I am talking about. So I have to move to look back and I jump backwards. This is what I mean that prospection and retrospection means when we are setting a relationship, establishing a relationship between two actions in which one is submitted to the other, taking one as the reference of time and taking the other as the secondary action to which we will apply the prospection and or the retrospection. Okay, we have explained the concepts of prospection, retrospection. We have explained how they might affect the relationship between verb and complement, how they might affect the relationship between the Kevin or the auxiliary and the main verb within the verb sentence, the verb phrase, I'm sorry, and we have also explained how they might affect the relationship between two sentences. Continuing with this last aspect of prospection, retrospection, I would like to explain what happens when I am using hypotheses in English. In English, they do not have the subjunctive mode as we have the subjunctive mode as we have in Spanish. We have subjunctive to show that we are not 100% sure, that something is not probable, etc., etc. So what is it that they do to fill in for the void which the lack of the subjunctive leaves in the language? What they do is that they shift, they fold up the timeline and they shift the time one step further back in the past. So they fold up the timeline over itself, and what is present becomes past. This is like a time shift and a tense shift, obviously. So what happens when I want to hypothesize about something in the present? When I want to hypothesize about something in the present, I automatically will express it using a past simple. Then what happens when I have to apply a prospection to that reference of time? Obviously, as I am in the past, simple meaning present, when I mean something that might take place in the future, my prospection will not be future, it will be conditional. And what happens when I am hypothesizing about something that might have happened in the past, but it's just that, a hypothesis. So instead of using the past simple, I use a past perfect tense. But that's exactly what happens with conditionals. When you use a conditional and you are more or less 100% sure that something will be like that, if you study hard, you will pass. Okay, that means that Given that, something will certainly happen. What happens when I'm hypothesizing about the present? I take a step back in the past and I say, if I were tall and slim, which I am not, I am hypothesizing about the present. If I were tall and slim, I would be a model. So, prospection, moving forward. But that prospection is in a conditional tense. If I were an intelligent person, I would have got a better job. I would have found a better job. So I am mixing conditionals because the condition is present or all time. I mean, I am or I am not a clever person, present or all time. But the consequence is retrospective, which means I have to use a past perfect. Or for example, with the I wish, every time I make this face means that I am hypothesizing. I express a wish. I express a hypothesis. I am dreaming away. So with the I wish my son would pass his C1 this year. So I am expressing a wish referring to the future. I'm referring to the future. But as it is a hypothesis and I took a step back in time, my present, my I wish, really, let's say, I set the prospection to the future using a conditional, because the I wish in itself, it simply means a hypothesis. Oh, I wish I were beautiful. So I wish is the hypothesis, and when I remain at the same point, I use a past simple. I wish I had accepted the job. This means that in the past I didn't accept it, and now I am making a hypothesis as to what would have happened if I had accepted it. And the same happens with the third type conditionals. If I had met him before, I would have done it. Okay, so what happens with the third type conditionals? That since I go further back in the past, because I am hypothesizing about something past, the past simple is not valid anymore. I have to use a past perfect for the conditional. What happens next? That given the condition, I establish a prospection. That's why I use a conditional. But at the same time, that conditional or that consequence is still past. It is still past. That's why I use a conditional perfect. If I had accepted the job, I would have become rich in the past. So my past is a past perfect because I have taken one step to the past. So this is what happens when I am hypothesizing. I simply take a step to the past, which means that my present is past simple and my past is past perfect. It takes a little bit to understand, but once you understand it, you control verb patterns, you control reported speech, you control models in the past, as we usually say, you control conditional sentences, you control the I wish, you control all sorts of hypothetical sentences that you might think of. So at present, it's a little bit of a shock because it's completely different to what we have here in Spanish. But obviously, when you speak another language, you have to switch to the ship or to the way of approaching reality that new language has.